G'day everyone and welcome to Swifterholics for the Team Racing Without Borders Spring League. This is round number 4. We're headed around the Highline of New York. We've got a fairly big field here in B. A smaller group in A. Looks a little bit more like an AHDR Club Championships than a mixed race, but that's okay. That's going to be set the scene for some interesting tactics in that race for sure. So I've got about a minute and a half until these B-grade riders set off this morning. So let's have a little look at the course today. So we are taking in one lap of the Highline route around New York, and it's a little bit deceptive saying one lap because that one lap doesn't actually start until you get to the top of the New York KOM. So these riders will have about 3 kilometers at ground level on those roads before hitting the glass roads, and then they'll spend the rest of the time up on the elevated roads of New York, covering that New York KOM twice, and it is a hilltop finish at the top the second time around. There's a prime on offer for that climb today as well, so that'll add a little bit of spice to this race. Looking at the fields, as I said, fairly small field in A grade, dominated by Team AHDR. So a few names, if you've been following this series, you might recognise Espen, Eva, Lewis, Nevry, and Shaw. Newcomer Andrew Beasley just joined Zwift Racing a couple of weeks ago, so he's one we haven't seen before, but certainly has the power numbers that stack up for potentially a good result here today. So we'll be watching him with interest. And a much larger field in the Bs once again. Team RWB very well represented. Team AHDR sending a good squad once again. And we have last week's winner Moritz Polmeyer for Team Cone back in the field as well. So plenty of firepower there. And we'll make sure we don't get stuck on the Zwift Power screen today as the B graders are off. So let's jump in with them. Let's find someone who's off racing and check in on this field as we head off through our 3 kilometer ground level lead in before we do get up onto those elevated roads, those polarizing glass roads of New York City. And there was some fun chat in the race field before the start about the love-hate relationship people have with this world and this race course and these glass roads in particular. So nice tight bunched field here in the Bs, setting off. The As won't be far behind. Let's quickly just go back and check in on the series standings. So in B grade, the battle for the teams classification has actually been a really fascinating one. So Team AHD are currently leading that, but only a very small gap back to Team RWB, who we've seen have thrown the kitchen sink at it again and have a huge field in today. And in the individual classification for the Bs, Colin Brown from Dirt leads, followed by Dan Wells from AHDR. And then a fairly tight leaderboard, as you can see. And so some names here we've seen on previous weeks. Peters from Fast Forward, very aggressive rider, always on the front, trying things out. And so looking forward to seeing what he can produce today. And a few AHDR riders prominent as well. Stuart Williams there in 6th and Chris Davies down in 11th. Over in A, Lewis Bertoni and Espen Hordvik lead it out. Gary Walker from BRC, I don't think he is actually racing today. So Lewis and Espen look to have this one basically at their control. And Pierre from AHDR not racing today either. So looking for Lewis and Espen to extend their lead here. And AHDR have been dominant in this A grade teams competition, sending a strong field every single week. So we'll jump back now into Zwift and let's see how our Bs and our As are faring. So nice tight bunch here. Got about a kilometre to go until we hit the glass roads in the B grade race. Little bit of attrition so far, so we're sitting here at the back with no socks. About 50 or so riders of our 70 starters appear to have made it into this front group. And before we hit the glass roads, a little while before we get to the climb, let's just check in on our A grade riders, if we can find them. Just having a little bit of trouble getting into our A grade race. I'll keep working on that. We'll stick with the Bs for now. As they make this right turn and they head up onto the glass, we are going to be up on the elevated roads from this point onwards. So a very different looking race to what we've had in the previous one. So last week was a flat finish or flat course and then a very flat finish on the mall in London. So a very different experience today with the hilltop finish on the New York KOM. So we might see a few different names. There's definitely some different tactics. As the field does start to stretch, heading up this 7-8% grade, it is a nasty kick to start, and we look like we might see the first big selections of this race. Let's jump up the front and have a look at how this race is going. So we see Chris Davies, Mark Brassington, they're mid-pack at the moment. Brad Martin's joining us this week. Haven't seen him in this series yet, but he's going to join in, try his luck on the New York KOM. Stuart Williams, our aggressor from last week around London, looking very strong, sitting in fourth, and it is last week's winner, Moritz Pohlmeier, who is setting the tempo up this little climb to get us started. Obviously not up to the main KOM just yet, but you can see on the minimap just how much this attack from Pohlmeier is stretching out the field. He's got a 2-second gap on the field. They seem to be clumping in behind him fairly well here. As we come over this crest, we'll flick back through the field. Dan Wells has done well. He's stuck on through this surge. Chris Davies, Mark Brassington also in touch at the moment. But some splits happening. Anyone behind these guys might be in trouble. So that's about 28th place. We're seeing a little bit of a split, and let's see who's been caught on the wrong side of that. Up that first climb. Looks like Brad's been gapped by a couple of seconds here. And Nursock's back in 52nd at the moment, but got some company to see this one through. So we can see on the minimap now lots of little groups of these 2 and 3 riders. Completely shattered by this first little hill. So we'll see whether there's a nice little group here that Brad's in around about 45th place. We might be able to work together and start reeling in some of these smaller blobs. We'll keep an eye on that as we flip back up to our main leading peloton. A small group here just off the peloton. 2 of our AHDR riders in this one, Chris and Mark, looking to work together with this small group to close down the gaps that's opened up here. We do have some flatter roads, a couple little rollers, but nothing too severe before we do get to the NYC KOM. So we might have an opportunity for these riders to close down this 3-second gap to our leading group, which sits at 21 riders at the moment. So some big changes early on in the B grade race. Strong attack there from Pohlmeier off the front, dragging the field up that first short hill, and that has led to almost 50 riders off the back. And we'll just jump back in and see whether this second group on the road does look like they've managed to work together here. A little bit more interest in chasing and pushing the pace than we had up the front, and these 5 riders are going to tack on. So we will have a clear peloton of 28 riders as we do head around the elevated roads of New York to the New York City KOM, and expect to see some fireworks there and possibly some more attrition. Now I'm going to try and find our A-grade riders. It's just been an unusually challenging thing to do today. But we have them now, so we can see the A's have also made it up that first climb, and looks like some aggression from the AHDR team from the gate. No waiting around. Sure, off the front, was 5 seconds ahead of the rider we were sitting in with there. Let's take a look at how this race is shaping up. So we have Neve, Ree, and Sure off the front, 2 second gap back to a small group of riders. Got Lewis and Espen, plus our newcomer Beasley sitting in that group. And then Faye off the back, trying to chase on these flatter roads before we get to the next KOM. But it is some aggressive riding from AHDR, which is breaking up this race right now. Looks like the peloton have reeled in Sure, and we'll have a chase group of 6 riders trying to close down this gap to Neve, Ree. So the AHDR guys have done well here. They've managed to shell 1 rider, and it's a 5 versus 2 scenario. So expecting some interesting tactics there from the guys. Very different to a normal, big Zwift race with a big rolling peloton. And we might see these guys basically just rolling off the front, taking in turns to attack and force the other 2 riders to chase if they're going to stay on. I wouldn't want to be in this race in any other jersey today, that's for sure. This looks like it's going to be a heck of a ride for non-AHDR riders to try and hold on. I know the AHDR guys do like a little bit of aggression. We know we enjoy talking tactics and seeing what we can do. And as I say that, here we go, Espen surging over the top as they make the catch. He's now opening up a gap as we go up this next little kicker. Hitting 12% here, forcing Bugden to chase. Buses from Belgium. Just going to try and absolutely shatter this field's legs before we get to the KOM. So nice little gap here opening up for Espen. We've seen him strong all through the series, obviously taking a commanding lead in the individual classification and positioning AHDR here as well to continue their dominance of this series. This is quite a strong attack here. Not content to let the opposition chase and tire out their legs. Espen's going early and going hard and going possibly for the win on his own. It is a fairly short course today. We're a third of the way through it, 7 Ks in, only 13 Ks to go. And a 7-second gap now for Espen. So while Espen does that and sets off on his solo mission to break some hearts here today, I'm going to try and jump back in with the bees. Again, not as easy a task as it has been in the past. I was having some difficulties with my companion app. Today they don't make it as easy as it perhaps could be to jump in with riders. Espen now extending to a 9-second gap. There's some interest in the field. Some orange numbers there from Buses trying to surge and get some momentum in this group to chase down this lone attacker But he's only doing one thing at the moment, that's extending his gap out to 9, possibly looking to get to 10 seconds now. There we go, we found a rider in B grade who I can jump in with, which was Chris Davies. So it looks like the B grade riders are on to the NYC KOM. In fact, they're actually right at the pointy end of it, and we see some well-known agitators at the front of this field: Peters, Wells, Polmeyer, all up the pointy end. Looks like it's going to be Peters and Daniel Wells who are going to go wheel for wheel for the points here. And definitely a very reduced bunch as we come up to the final kicker for the points. Let's have a look through the field and see what damage has been done here up the hill. So we've got these two in the lead now, 2 second gap back to Polmeyer, a few more seconds back to others in the field. So we've got Chris at 11 seconds. Stewart sitting in 14th with a small group, another several seconds behind that. Mark still holding in the top 20. And then some bigger gaps back to the rest of the field. Let's jump back at the front and check on our leaders here as we are heading for the line. Looks like Dan Wells is keen on the points. He kicks. Has kicked hard. He's gotten away from Peters, opened up a 5 second gap. Dan Wells takes the KOM in commanding fashion. Peters is going to come over second. Polmeyer a few seconds back in third. And let's have a look at what's going to happen as we get onto this fast descent. Whether there's going to be any coming back together of these riders. This field has been absolutely shattered. From a fairly big field of 70, we're down to just a few contenders here. And realistically, depending on if this rider primed coaching can get back on from 6th spot, we might be down to only 5 or 6 riders who are realistically in contention here as we head back around for the course proper, I suppose. So we've had our lead in up to that KOM banner. Now we have one lap of the Highline route with Dan holding a 3 second lead over Peters and a few more seconds back to other riders. So fantastic climbing there from Dan. He's been dominant across multiple series, really. And continuing his good form here today, obviously. So now let's jump back in with the A-grade riders. They're coming up to the KOM as well. Looks like Espen's carved out a significant advantage over the bulk of the field, but Lewis looking to bridge across, make this an AHDR 1-2 show. So only 4 seconds now between Espen and Lewis, with a big gap back to the rest of the field, 21 seconds to Busses and then 27 seconds to a small group sitting 4th to 7th on the road, which have got our 2 non-AHDR riders in there, but AHDR definitely taking this one by the scruff of the neck. Espen goes through the KOM banner. Strong attack, really just put it to this field, rode away from them, extended his gap, and looks like this is going to be a race-winning move from Espen. The question now is, can Lewis get onto his wheel? And will these two work together to stay away from Busses from ZVC to make it an AHDR 1-2? And you think at this point that it would make sense for these two teammates to work together and make sure that they hold that advantage. And we might see our group of 4 riders also manage to make up some ground on the flatter roads. On Busses, we might have a 5-way go for that final spot on the podium. Let's jump back through. A quick check-in on how these riders are doing. We see some more gaps here. Shure's had a hard time up the climb, trying to tack back on as we go down this descent, but a little 5-second gap now opening up at the back of the field as well. We have one less rider here in this second group as Busses kicks on well. Looks like he's crossing this gap, possibly going to be joining our leading two riders. It's going to be interesting to see whether these AHDR riders at the front can work together and hold him off as we go around the rolling roads of New York. So, plenty of action going on in the A grade race. About a 15 seconds lead now for our leaders over the chasing rider. Now let's go back and have a look at the B graders and see if they've managed to come back together, and indeed they have. We do have a group here at the front of the race who have come back together on the descent and over these first few rollers. So Prime Coaching managed to get back on, sitting in 6th spot. Dan's in this lead group, and it looks like a lead group of 9 riders who are going to contest this one. Dan, the lone AHDR representative, Peters from Fast Forward there again. Zwack, another name we've seen mentioned pretty frequently in these broadcasts, and there he is. Last week's winner, Polmeyer, in amongst it again. So an elite group of 9 at the front of this race. Let's jump back to the second group on the road. So Chris Davies, Stuart Williams represented in this one. And then back to the third group on the road features Mark Brassington and Brad Martin. There's plenty of damage done by those steep pinches on the New York KOM, breaking this race into several groups. So we can see here on the minimap the lead that has been established by that front group of 9, and a completely shattered race and a difficult one to see any of these riders coming back together. Expecting to see these groups just sort of work together now towards the finished 18-second gap to this second group. Not completely out of the realms of possibility, but it would be a heck of an effort to pull back from here. So let's just jump back in with our leaders. They have about 6 kilometers to go. So what I might do here is jump back to the A grade race for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and catch the B grade finish. Actually, we'll see how the A graders are going. They started a minute behind the B graders and had a much smaller field, but we've seen the pace that Espen was setting on the front of this race. So they are about a kilometer behind and a much smaller group here. So let's sit in with the A's for a little bit, and then we'll jump back to the B's for the conclusion of their race. And while we've been watching the B's, it looks like our chasing group have managed to close ever so slightly. They did manage to reel in Busses from Belgium, and together they seem to be working pretty well. We saw a 15-second gap back to Busses and up to 28 seconds back to the chasers earlier on. Now only 10 seconds now with Busses in that group. So 2 HDR riders off the front, another 2, a further 10 seconds back. Looking to see if they can get onto the podium today, and we are all set for a barnstorming final KOM on this one to see who's going to take it. Whether it's going to be Lewis and Espen, can they work together and stay off the front here, or is our group of 4 behind going to really win? Let's have a look there. Look at them now and see how well these guys are working together. So 2 HDR riders here. You'd expect them to be sitting off and letting these other 2 riders do the chasing. And we see Nivri doing exactly that. Just rolling to the back now after super tucking that descent. Letting Bugden take the lead, get into the wind, and do the work of this chase, which is sort of holding steady now, 10 seconds. If you can see the riders in front of them, they're just in the distance. There's enough of a carrot there to incentivize this chase. So as we go over our next rolling hill here, looks like Lewis and Espen just cranking up the pace a little bit, extending that gap out to 11 seconds. Trying to stay away from these 4 chases. This is a tightly balanced race as we see Beasley. A little bit of an effort here, maybe using this kicker as a ramp to try and bridge across without taking these other riders with him. And opening up a little bit of a gap too. It's going to have to be a sustained effort to bridge across here, but he's eaten into 4 seconds advantage of our 2 leaders. That's down to 7 seconds now. And the chase is on in earnest. In the background, this is an interesting move. It could bring this whole race back together. As the chase is real in the attack from Beasley, but it's done some damage. It's 8 seconds now to our leaders. And they're going to have to make sure they work together pretty well here. Otherwise, this group are going to reel them in. About 5 kilometers to go in this race now. As Buses is the next one to make an attempt here at bridging this gap solo. So these 4 riders not content to sit together and sit off the back here. We've seen some decided efforts to try and bridge this gap, bring this race back together before we hit the final KOM. So only a 6 second, 5 second gap now to Lewis and Espen. And 2 seconds back to the other 3 chasers. So poised on a knife edge, this one. As we can zoom out now, have a look at these gaps. Lewis and Espen holding 7 seconds over this chasing group. Buses trying to bridge, currently in no man's land, trying to find that wheel. It does look like he's being reeled back in ever so slowly by our 3 chasers. So these riders 16.2 kilometers in. This is going to get a little bit tight. I'm going to jump back in with the B riders because they must be getting pretty close to the lower slopes of the New York KOM for our final push up to the finish line. And I continue to have my issues with Companion app and being able to switch grades. Apologies for that being a little bit slower today. But at least we've got an exciting chase here to sit in with while we wait for those B grade riders. Who I am still struggling to find. So these gaps, these time gaps on here don't seem quite right. Look like Boosters was pretty much on the wheel of Lewis and Espen there. Still saying a 2 second gap. So that little kicker, again, having some impact here and stretching the field out. Now we're not seeing these defined groups anymore. We do have Nivri and Beasley closing that move from Boosters, getting across that gap and now setting off after our 2 leaders, Lewis and Espen. All right, jumping back in with the Bs now. Found a way of doing it. There's No Socks back in 42nd, doing well out of a field of 70. Brad Martin and Mark Brassington there in this group looking for a top 20 spot. Stuart Williams contesting for a top 10 with this group on the road. And then now 42 second gap to our lead group. And we are approaching the KOM now. Let's sit in for what looks like an exciting finish. So this elite group of 9 have managed to extend their gap, got a clear gap on the rest of the field, and now this is where the race is going to be decided. Dan is the first one to kick it off, pushing hard up this hill. 7 watts per kilo. Polmeyer not willing to give it up. We saw these two go to the line around London, obviously not just flat sprinters though. Some serious climbing talent here at the front of this race. They've opened up a 5-second gap on Peters and the others chasing behind. This is where it's going to be decided. Dan kicks again. Up the steep pinch, 15%, and Dan popping some red numbers over 8 watts a kilo. Opening up a little bit of a gap here on Polmeyer, who kicks back. Closing back up to Dan's wheel as we get ever higher through the skyscrapers of New York. Polmeyer keeping the momentum on. Briefly rolls to the lead. It looks like there's an uneasy truce now between these two riders. We do have 2 more pinches to go. Who's it going to be? Dan Wells now takes the initiative. He kicks up to 6.5 watts per kilo. Starts to put a few bike lengths into Polmeyer again. And kicking away now. 10 bike length lead for Dan Wells. Coming over the crest now. What's Polmeyer got on the flat roads? Can he kick back? Can he close this gap? Dan, 2 seconds ahead. Just 1 ramp to go. To get to the top, looks like Polmeyer is trying to close. Down to just a second on these flatter roads. What's he got left? Does he have a final kick in him as we get to this final steep pinch? Sitting with Dan. Polmeyer not far behind both riders, conserving some legs on these flatter roads, but Polmeyer now looks like he's trying to accelerate, trying to get back on that wheel for this final steep pinch. And that gap is closing now, just a couple of bike lengths down to Dan. Here goes Dan, kicking to the line, 10, 11 watts per kilo. Not waiting for Polmeyer to latch on. Polmeyer with a feather. Perfect power up. What can he do with it? It looks like Dan's doesn't have the power up, but he has got the legs. Extending his lead now, riding away from Polmeyer. Dan Wells from AHDR takes the win, rides into the series lead as well. Brilliant ride. Polmeyer coming through for second. And now we jump back in with the contest for that final podium spot. Bogarts from BZR. Peters from Fast Forward going to the line. 3-way go. Barrett kicks back. And it is Bogarts from BZR who does take the trophy for third on the race today. It's an absolute barnstorming final climb there from the B graders. And I will try and get us back to the A's to see the end of their race, but there's no guaranteed thing at the moment. We're having all sorts of trouble with Companion app and not wanting to let me jump into fan view with these riders. Let's see what we can do. Maybe if we jump back to me, will be some hope of finding our A graders. They can't be far from the finish. Oh, this system worked so very well last week. Not to be this week, I don't know why. but it looks like we might just be out of luck, unfortunately, today. And just as we were poised for such a good finish there, Lewis and Espen off the front, looking strong, but with the group closing close behind. Well, looks like technology has defeated us today, unfortunately, for the A-grade race. I can't get back to them. I can't find anyone on Companion app, so apologies for that. Sorry to our A-grade riders, I'm not able to catch the finish to that race. We'll have to have a look at the results later on Zwift Power. So thank you for joining us today. Well done to Dan Wells again from AHDR, taking the series lead, and some brilliant riding from the AHDR boys, staying prominent in that group. We saw them up there in the top 10, top 20, a number of riders there, and so we'll look with interest at the team standings and whether they were able to hold onto that lead over the Racing Without Borders team. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.